Hello, everyone. I would like to give a warm welcome for everyone in different places and different time zones. Welcome to the second conference on population, poverty, and inequality. It's my privilege to chair this session. My name is Marcelo Neri, and the topic is fascinating, entrepreneurship, with lots of interactions with gender things. And I'm very happy to be in this session. I was a couple of days ago in a seminar in Brazil, in a conference. I was impressed by a table on gender differential, but among employees, and I'm very impressed by the work done on this for this table. I would like to introduce you to Marlene Lee, our chat and Q&A moderator. She's from the Population Reference Bureau. She's also a member with me and with Jocelyn, one of the authors, one of the presenters here on the panel of the conference. So we are fortunate to have 3 papers, so we have more room for discussion. And so I will follow the order of the conference and the conference prospects. And so I will introduce one by one, and then I say play the video, and then we will watch the 3 videos. And then each of you will comment another presenter's paper. So the first paper is Have Money to Make Money, Bargaining Behavior and Financial Need of Micro-Entrepreneurs. Gisela Kaji from Vassar College will present this paper. Please, Gisela, and please play the video.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gisela Kagi, and I'm going to be presenting today a paper that I have with co-authors Morgan Hardy and Lena Song. And our paper is entitled Got to Have Money to Make Money, Bargaining Behavior and Financial Need of Micro-Entrepreneurs. So the research question we're really interested in today is looking at profits for small firms. So we know that small firms dominate the firm size distribution and employment. And there's a vast empirical literature on barriers for these small firms on how to increase profits. Many things have been looked at: capital, credit, management, crowding, networks, infrastructure. Lots of things have been looked at. One thing that has not received as much attention is the way in which these firms agree upon prices with their customers. So bargaining over prices of goods and services, right, is often an integral part of operations for these small firms. And how that bargaining process is done has not received much attention. So this paper, we're going to be specifically looking at what's driving bargaining behavior of small firm owners and resultant final pricing of micro enterprises, with the idea that the profit a firm sees is directly related to the price that they're able to charge the customers. The key takeaway that we're going to find from this paper is that we're going to document and interpret a large and robust empirical relationship between the seller's endowment and the final price of the transaction. So we're going to find that characteristics of the seller are actually influencing the final price of a transaction. This paper, in a nutshell, can be broken down into an empirical section and a possible intuition section, which is more theoretical. So the empirical section has 2 components. The first is using garment makers in Ghana. These are very small firms. We completed a panel of firms where we went back multiple years and we completed real bargaining exercises with them. And we find that for a firm, if they have increased personal endowment, the final price and the number of rounds that they go through in the bargaining process is also increased. Okay, so this is done in Ghana, and we order real shirts from these garment makers, and we have rich panel data on these people. So we have lots of different characteristics, and it's the same people over time. So we have a panel of firms here. And then in one of the years of our data, we actually conduct an experiment where we give a randomized endowment to these firms, and we have them bargain over the price of a shirt with a computer. And we find that an increased randomized endowment is also increasing surplus. Okay. And then in the paper, we talk about intuition for this, suggesting one potential mechanism, talking about if sellers are non-risk neutral, then you can find this type of stylized fact, okay, where you have increased endowment, which is leading to increased surplus allocation. We are not staking a claim that this is the only possible mechanism. It's just one potential mechanism we are putting forward. And in this presentation, I'm not going to be able to have time to go into the mechanism section much, but I am happy to talk about it and refer you to the paper. So for this paper, what we did is in 2014, we conducted a firm census and gathered baseline characteristics of garment makers in Jorge, Ghana. These are very small firms, typically just the firm owner is the only employee. And then in 2018 and 19, we completed a real bargaining exercise with these firms. So we ordered a child's shirt from each firm. No gender was specified. There's a very short window for delivery, and we had our enumerators had memorized very detailed scripts to really try to get all of the information about the bargaining process. This here is a picture of the shirts that were created, and they were later donated. And then in 2019, we conduct this experiment where we have a randomized endowment. That's what we call our game data. And so from this panel of garment making firms in 2018 and 19, we collect a lot of information. The primary key pieces of information to go over is the price. So from the bargaining, right, we have the first and final price after a scripted bargaining between the enumerator. They were trained to make it seem as normal as possible. And we also documented the number of rounds, the number of backs and forths that happened between the seller and the buyer. And then we also are measuring endowment. So our measure for endowment here for the seller, what we're using is household personal liquidity per capita. So most of these firms, these firm owners are cash poor, but there's a large variation in safety nets for the firm owner, okay? This here is a visual representation of the relationship that we're seeing. So on the x-axis is the change in personal liquidity between the 2 years, so between 2018 and 2019 for an individual firm owner. And on the y-axis is the change in the price that we're seeing, the final price that was settled on for the garment. And we can see, right, there's this positive relationship. So as the change in personal liquidity for a firm owner, right, goes up, the final price that they're charging on average is also going up, and vice versa if it's going down, right? So this is using, right, within firm variation and change in personal liquidity to look at this relationship. Looking at this in a regression framework, okay, our basic specification is going to be regressing the z-score of endowment. This is our L that's here in the equation. And then we're going to include controls. So we always include survey characteristics. We have a plethora of time varying characteristics that we can include about the firm, about the individual, et cetera. Again, I refer you to the paper for details on that. And then importantly, we're able to include firm owner fixed effects because we have a panel here. So all time invariant characteristics of the firm and the firm owner are not going to be associated in here. And so the results of this empirical specification is presented here. So the first panel here is showing final price. Column 1 includes the survey controls. 2 includes the firm fixed effects, and then 3 also steps in the time varying controls. And we can see that the association between personal liquidity per capita is strongly associated with the final price that you agree on. So a 1 standard deviation increase in personal liquidity per capita is associated with about a 5% increase in final price once the firm fixed effects are included, and also when the time varying characteristics are included. We can also see that there's a significant positive relationship between the number of rounds. So this is the number of back and forths between the seller and the buyer that happen. And so that's also been increasing. Now, next to move on to the empirical part, which was the game that we did. So now we played games with the sellers in which they were incentivized to earn real cash. So there's a randomized endowment amount of 25 or 5 Ghana cedis, and the sellers were given this amount prior to the game. And then the game is that firm owners bargained with a tablet over surplus division. They bargained over the price of a shirt in which they got to keep the surplus division. So the program, the prompt specifically said, the computer has been programmed to behave like a buyer, bargaining with you over the price of a garment. This game is being played for real money. If you and the computer are able to agree on the price, we will give you that money. Okay, so what this does in the pro, right, it's causal, it's experimental, it's randomized endowment, and it abstracts away from opportunity cost, right? The cons is that it's artificial. You are asking the sellers to play this game with the tablet. Okay. The results of this game are that a higher endowment amount of 25 Ghana cedis is significantly associated with a higher final price. When we look at all days together, this is true. We note that over the 2 days of our surveying, that on the first day, this association is stronger, this effect is stronger. And on day 2, it's not as strong, we believe, because due to spillovers of people talking to each other and what's happening. So potential mechanism for this, a natural intuition and a natural place to start is that firms are not risk neutral. Many times, right, firms are modeled as risk neutral. And so a potential initial intuition place to start, right, is that they're not. So the trade-off that these firms are making, right, is that for a low price, right, these firm owners, right, the sellers are more certain of a sale at that price, right, but they get less profit, right, the lower the price is. If the price is higher, okay, there's a possible loss of sale, but higher price conditional on them selling it. Okay, so what we're able to do in the paper is go through and model this. Okay, and we model, right, that low endowment sellers are actually acting more risk adverse because they have more to gain from any transaction and more to lose in the case of which a buyer walks away. Okay, in which the bargaining breaks down. So in conclusion, this paper, right, documents empirical evidence that personal wealth, personal endowment predicts micro-entrepreneurs' bargaining behavior in an economically meaningful and statistically significant way, right? This is robust to a multitude of controls and research designs. So we're showing evidence and intuition for a poverty multiplier in strategic interactions, right? So this type of strategic interaction, bargaining, is very, very common for firms in low-income countries. And so this evidence is suggestive, right, that low-wealth individuals may actually be bargaining their way into a lower surplus. Okay, insights from this paper may be applied to any market where prices are set by sellers beforehand, right? So it begs the question, right? Could price regulation have distributional consequences in these markets? Future research is needed to exactly detail the mechanisms. We are putting forth one potential mechanism here, but we are not claiming that that is the only mechanism at play. Thank you very much.
Marcelo, you're muted.
Uh, um, thank you very much, Gisela. Very nice paper. I like very much the idea of the poverty multiplier. It's very impressive, the work. Congratulations. Let's move now to the second paper. The second paper is, does age at first and current marriage cause long-term female entrepreneurship? Evidence from Nigeria. Uchina Efobi from Covenant University will present. Please play the video.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Uchina Efobi, and I'm presenting this paper titled Age at First and Current Marriage and Female Entrepreneurship in Nigeria on behalf of my other co-authors. Now, the introduction of this paper is as follows. In 2008, 46.1% of women were actually married before age 18, and this increased to 47.7% in 2013, although this trend is disproportionately spread by regions in Nigeria, such that in northern region, more women get into marriage before the ages of 18 compared to the southern region. Now, the issue with early marriage is that it actually affects the education of the woman. It also affects her health and fertility. And there are other effects in terms of women's empowerment and intra-marriage agency. Now, the research question of this paper is, we are trying to answer two main research questions, which is, what is the relationship between the age of marriage entry and self-employment? And we also try to examine if there are other heterogeneous effects in terms of between those that dwell in rural area compared to those that dwell in the urban area. And we also try to also understand through what channels such relationship exists. This inquiry is closely related to two strands of literature. The first is the literature that looks at the long-term consequences of women's age at marriage entry, and the other strand is one that looks at the effect of a woman's age and her economic engagement. Now, there are two main pathways through which these effects can be seen. The first is actually through intra-household bargaining power of the woman, which is most likely going to be affected by early marriage entry. And the other is the foregone premarital human capital investment in terms of her education, her social network development, which overall affects her intra-marriage agency. Now, in answering our research question, we actually relied on the demographic health survey for the period 2008 and 2013. And this survey actually focuses on women within ages of 15 to 49, and it is a nationally representative survey that actually covers all the 36 states in Nigeria, including the Federal Capital Territory. So the working sample of this our study is actually women who are married, not those that have been remarried, and only women who are currently married. The essence is because if we include other groups of women, then we might be overestimating our relationship, and we might be introducing some form of biases. Now, in terms of our entrepreneurship measure, we used two main indicators, which is a dummy if the woman is self-employed and currently working in such business, and 80% of our sample are actually self-employed. Then we also included intensity of such engagement, which is actually a dummy if the woman is self-employed, currently working in such business and works there all year round. Now, it is important to actually state upfront that we did not consider the quality of such engagement because our data did not have such information. Now, how did we measure age at marriage entry? We measured age at marriage entry as the exact age at entry into the woman's first marriage, current marriage, and only marriage. And the average age of marriage entry is 17 years from our sample. Now, we also included other observable coverage to improve to improve our estimates. Now, there are endogeneity issues with age at marriage entry, and the first source of endogeneity is actually reverse causality, such that the woman's economic engagement is actually affecting her age at marriage entry. Then the other source is unobserved confounding variables. For instance, cultural factors can actually affect a woman's economic engagement and also affect a woman's age at marriage entry. Then the next issue is self-selection, so that a woman can self-select because of different reasons into marrying early or marrying later. Now, we use an instrument to actually address this endogeneity issue, and the instrument is a cluster average of young women whose first sexual encounters are with males that are less than 18 years old. The intuition being that early marriage is actually influenced by parents' desire to marry girls or before they engage in premarital sexual encounters. From our first stage relationship between the instrument and age at marriage entry, we find that the instrument actually increased the age at marriage entry by 1.152 for the likelihood of entrepreneurship engagement equation and 1.146 for the entrepreneurship intensity equation. And the reason being that women who grow up in such communities are most likely going to be discriminated against, and which will actually increase their age at marriage entry. And the first stage F statistics actually show that this instrument is valid. Now, this is our result, and the result shows that compared to the average entrepreneurship engagement of the women in the sample, an additional age at marriage entry actually increases entrepreneurship by 6.20%. And it also increases entrepreneurship intensity by 5.10%. And these effects are actually significant. And when considering rural versus urban women, we find that this effect is actually stronger for urban women compared to rural women. Of course, this is expected because in the urban areas, there are more opportunities for entrepreneurship engagement, such that an additional age before marriage entry for women in the urban area will actually increase the entrepreneurship engagement and intensity more than women in rural areas. Now, there are two likely channels which were estimated, and it includes education and the empowerment of the woman, such that an additional age at marriage entry actually increases the woman's education completion and also increases her empowerment. And how we measure the empowerment is in terms of intra-household bargaining power of the woman. Now, this our result is actually robust to selective migration. It's also robust to the exclusion of spouse characteristics, and it is also consistent when we measure age at marriage entry as a dummy if the woman is married below 18 and 0 if she's married above 19. And then it is also robust to an estimation that we use to actually address such self-selection issue, which is the propensity score matching, so that we matched women that married at 18 years and below with other women based on observable characteristics, and we still find that the age at marriage entry and with an additional age at marriage entry actually increases the woman's entrepreneurship engagement. Now, the main policy implication of this study is that with the rising unemployment and social construction along gender lines in most communities in Nigeria, consideration of self-employment at any level could be an essential instrument for female empowerment. Of course, and the age at marriage entry could be a significant limiting factor to actually achieve such such empowerment. So policies that actually discourage early marriage may have significant economic consequences for women, especially their entrepreneurship engagement. In Nigeria, for instance, there's this Child Rights Act of 2003, and then there's a recent one that was introduced in 2017. That was introduced with the intention of actually ending child marriage. But the issue with the implementation is that there are cultural and religious factors that actually limits the enforcement and implementation of such policies. So our study actually shows that there are economic implications if such policies and acts are not efficiently enforced, because it will affect the long-term economic engagement of these women if they actually get into marriage at early ages. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Uchina. Very nice paper, like very much this demographic connection. And I think this law that you mentioned on marriage would be quite an interesting experiment. Let's move now to the third video, strategies women use in low-middle income countries to enable child hearing and economic activity in informal markets. This will be presented by our colleague Jocelyn Finlay from Harvard. Please play the video.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. So in my talk, I'm going to be talking about fertility and women's labour force participation in low and middle income countries. So I'm here in the entrepreneurship session, and I'll instead of in the women's labour force participation session, and I'll justify that in that over 60% of working women in low and middle income countries report to be self-employed. So there's actually a pretty strong overlap between labour force participation and entrepreneurship. So I'm going to be looking at the connection with fertility and in particular in this low and middle income country setting. So what I want to do is aim to redirect research of women's labour force participation in low and middle income countries. So I feel that a lot of research has been based on theories that have been developed for high income country settings, and we're just at the moment in the literature sort of gravitating towards replicating those studies but in a low and middle income country context. And with this paper, my aim is to actually say we need to have new theories, explore new mechanisms that are relevant for women in low and middle income countries. And as a result, be able to develop policies that are relevant for women in these settings, and not just transfer what we have in high income countries and expect them to be relevant for women in the low and middle income country setting. So in the paper that I have, and it's actually under the revise and resubmit phase at World Development Journal, and in this paper I put forward 2 challenges and 2 investigations. So I challenge underlying theories that we're using from high income countries and then just translating them for low and middle income countries. And so I challenge our pursuit of that, and then explore 2 mechanisms that may be more relevant for women in low and middle income countries of the connection between fertility and female labour force participation. So one of the theories that I challenge is that the fact that we assume that fertility and work are endogenous. So there were a lot of theories and empirical evidence that fertility and work, women's work, were endogenous in high income settings. And in exploring low and middle income countries, we've just gone on and continued with that theory and not really explored the underlying mechanisms that may be more relevant in low and middle income countries. So the reason why I challenge this is in a review article, I found that in looking at across all of the literature broken up by low, middle and high income countries of this connection between fertility and female labour force participation, I found that the mechanisms that connect the two from fertility to female labour force participation are really different across the three income groups. And so it made me sort of challenge these underlying theories that we have at the moment. The quality-quantity trade-off, so that as incomes increase, there's an increase in demand for quality children and a decrease in the quantity demanded. And this frees up the time for women to engage in the labour market. So fertility going down and female labour force participation going up. And then there's a theory of relative wages rising, and this draws women into the labour market and increases the opportunity cost of childcare. And so rising labour force participation and the decreasing fertility. And so we've got this reverse causality happening. And they're based on these theories that were developed for and tested in high-income countries. But I think that these theories have little relevance for women in low and middle income countries. And so, as I said before, I mean, most of the women in low and middle income countries are self-employed, and 50 to 90% of women's employment is in the informal sector. And so the concept of work, relative wages and income are really different in low and middle income country settings. And in this paper, I set about challenging those theories. I also challenged the concept of a decision over fertility and work. And so making these simultaneous decisions of, how many children should I have? How does this free up my time to be in the labour force? Well, I don't think that women are really making decisions over fertility in the same way that they are in a high-income context. And there has been a little bit of evidence about women in low-income settings not really having strong preferences over fertility in general. And this was written about in a paper by a former colleague of mine, Isabel Gunter. And also that maybe fertility decisions are more of a reflection of the husband's preferences and not of the woman's. And so this concept of a decision is also something that we need to think a little bit about before we go and translate these theories. And so I'm putting forward that, okay, well, we're kind of destabilizing these theories, so we've got to explore new mechanisms that are relevant for the low and middle income country context. In the paper, I also questioned the unitary model of the household. So the theory that female labour force participation rests on this U shape that assumes some sort of unitary model of the household and income sharing. But income sharing is not actually practiced in all cultures. And so they have to act alone without their husbands and without institutional support because they're in this informal labour market. So women have to develop their own strategies to enable juggling childbearing and work. And this is sort of what I explore in the paper as well, is that for women in developing countries, in low and middle income countries, it's more about strategies for this juggle and not a response to different policies such as maternity leave or subsidised childcare. It's more about these strategies that they use. And that's what the second part of the paper is about, is to explore, well, what are these strategies? So one of the first things that we observe increasingly in low and middle income countries is that the relationship, the basic correlation between fertility and women's labour force participation is very weak, and if it exists, it's actually slightly positive. And so what we see here are lots of regressions, so 5 regressions for each continent, So each regression is just showing the basic correlation between the number of children and whether or not a woman is currently working or not. And we see, say, for the poorest, the poor, middle, rich in sub-Saharan Africa, that there's a positive correlation between the number of children she has and whether or not she's working. And this goes completely against the quality-quantity trade-off theory that showed some sort of inverse relationship. And the thing is, we see this across the board, except maybe for the richest there in Asia. But we see this across the board, that there's this positive correlation. But look at the coefficients, 0.01, this is just an OLS regression. So this is a 1% change. And so it's a very tiny magnitude. So positive, but very weak relationship between fertility and work in low and middle income countries. So we've got this positive relationship, and so we've got fertility going up and labour force participation going up, or nothing happening at all, really. But nothing changes when an extra child comes along for women in low and middle income countries. So how are they managing this? Both fertility and work draw on a woman's fixed stock of time. So one of the mechanisms that I explore in the paper is the use of long birth intervals to manage the time allocation between childcare and work. So I had heard in prior qualitative work that women are using long birth intervals to ensure that they only have one child to care for at a time. And this enables sort of the simultaneous act of working and childcare. So yes, this is the Kaplan-Meier survival curve, and I estimate this. I do the log rank test to show that they're statistically different from each other. So we've got women who are currently working versus women who are not currently working. The women who are working have longer birth intervals, and that's statistically different from the women who are not working. And then I do a Cox hazard model and show that even with a lot of control variables, that these long birth intervals are used. Longer birth intervals are used by women who are working. But again, the magnitudes are small. So it's probably not the main mechanism or the main strategy that women are using in low-income countries. So I explore another concept, and that is other women in the household as child carers. So we saw this in Heath's 2017 paper. She had suggestive evidence that other women in the household, including daughters, can be helpful with the child care. I also used a paper from the US by Susan Short that looked at not only cohabitating women, but the concept of available women. So women who are not working and not in school. And so these girls and women are used as the child carers, and this would somehow release the mother to then be able to go and work. And so we see with the event of an extra child, we have the extra child, fertility goes up, and also the mother's labour force participation can remain unchanged or actually increase, as our correlations would suggest, because they can rely on this other woman in their household. So what I find in this analysis, and you can see sort of even in the basic statistics here, that when the index woman is working, not working, then she's more likely to be with a woman who's also not working. She's available compared to women who are currently working, as opposed to co-residence. And so what I found was that co-residence matters, but this concept of availability that Susan Short explored in the US didn't fit the low and middle income country context. So it seems that having other women around is important, but it's not that there's this strict assignment of one of the other women does all the childcare and this releases the mother to be able to go and work. It seems that the women in the household are combining their time and resources and helping each other to do all of these duties together, rather than having a strict assignment. So thank you. So this paper was hopefully a step forward in describing fertility and work mechanisms for the low and middle income countries, low and middle income country context. As I found that this these mechanisms are moderated by national income per capita. So assumptions that hold for the high income countries are not going to have the same traction in the low and middle income countries where informal work dominates. Women develop strategies to juggle child-rearing and work, long birth intervals, and other women in the household as child carers. And so we need to look towards new theories and explore new mechanisms. And I hope that this paper was the beginning of that. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Very impressive work. Really interesting. So we received a message, Marlene, about changing in the setting here. Is it everything okay, Marlene? Should we
I think everything is okay. I just wanted the attendee who came in during Jocelyn's video to know that they would join us soon.
Okay, perfect.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So now we move to the comments part between each of the presenters. So first, please, our co-chair of the panel, Jocelyn Finlay, will comment Gisela Kaji paper.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Marcelo. Thanks, Marlene, for looking after our chat there. And I hope all our panelists have, all our attendees have made it over into being panelists so that they can see our chat as well. And so on Gisela's paper, I really enjoyed reading this paper, and it's super neat. So I hope it's heading towards being published somewhere really nice. And it almost seems too perfect. So there's primary data collection in Ghana, and then you do a computerized bargaining experiment in the second round, and find this result that poorer sellers agree to significantly lower prices than wealthier peers. And I'm going to just continue with my same theme that I explored in my own fertility and female labour force participation pursuit, in that I've started to be really careful about assuming that just because you get the same kind of expected result in a low or middle income country, that it's the same mechanisms at play that were sort of explored and then tested pretty rigorously, probably in a US context. So I was wondering if, say, this Rubenstein 1982 article, Perfect Equilibrium in a Bargaining Model, you know, that being one of your foundation models, was that based on a US scenario, which is probably dominated, even if it's small business, it's probably dominated by formal sector work. You know, they're going to be paying taxes and functioning in a formal market, as opposed to, say, these small scale sellers in the Ghanaian context. And it's, you know, with the fertility and female labour force participation work, I get the coefficients move in the same way, but the underlying mechanisms are completely different. And so I just wonder, can I start to infiltrate work on developing countries to say, well, let's not just take these underlying theories and assume that the same mechanisms hold. And it was your last point, in fact, on the presentation, to explore these mechanisms. And so I just sort of thought a random list of things of well, you know, what's the payoff system within the market structure? You know, does this, you know, sometimes they're very complicated kind of structures that are they nepotistic? Do people, they know each other? I mean, even you realized from day one to day two, they know each other so well, they talk a lot. So is there something about the payoffs that they have to pay in the marketplace that will influence how much risk that they're willing to take, or something like that? And then to what degree is there collusion? And so you start to see evidence of that. And does that play into the kind of prices that they're willing to accept? And so you said that the enumerator gathered details on this bargaining process, but I'm just wondering, Was this all sort of, you know, gathering this information was always from your questions, or did you ever ask sort of open-ended questions? And so that's another side of my research, thanks to being in a school of public health, is the qualitative research. And so you can gather quite a lot of information by asking good open-ended questions about the mechanisms that are at play. And it's a really interesting exercise. And maybe, I don't know if you've already done that, or if it's one that you can go back and do. And it's usually, who knows, in the time of COVID, if the market even exists anymore. But usually it's not too costly and difficult to implement a very informative qualitative study. So that was sort of my comments. But, you know, because otherwise the paper is so perfect, everything just fits together so neatly. And I was just wondering about these mechanisms as you were. That's my comments.
Thank you. Can I take a minute to respond?
Yes, I think so. Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This is really helpful. It's always very encouraging when somebody uses the word perfect during a discussion. So thank you so much. We've worked really hard on this. So just to address a couple of your questions, absolutely, I agree with your overarching comment that so much of the theory and the mechanisms comes from high income settings. And that's like what we're hoping one of the contributions of this can be, is that we're thinking about this classic bargaining model, right? This Rubenstein model, and saying like, what if, right? The firms and the households and the individuals are all linked, right? Because in classic theory, everyone is like these separate independent agents. And we know in low income settings, that is just not true, right? That's just not true. So there is not a lot of information about that. So, I mean, I think this is a broader comment, right, about the field and thinking about like having updated theories and updated priors about how these systems are actually working, because the context is very different. So that point is well taken. And I think we can work a little bit more on the writing and the framing to get that across, because what we're trying to do is take this classic model, right, and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, in this context, right, the individual, right, is linked to the firm, and that really matters. That really matters for the outcome of the firm. So that's point one. So, you know, because usual theory doesn't think of, right, incorporating risk, right, into the firm or the household. We don't usually think about it that way. The comment about the payoff structure in the market is a good one. And so I've done several other kind of data collection projects within this context. And collusion is very, very uncommon in this context. We actually have another project that's looking at why don't these small firms work together? That's an open question in the literature, right? It's an open question of why does, you know, individual firms who is typically just the firm owner is the only worker. There's no workers, right? No other paid workers in these firms. Why don't they get together and start to, you know, make medium-sized firms or work together on larger orders? But to the best of our knowledge, there's very, very little collusion in this context. And then, your point about qualitative research would be great. So we did not ask any open-ended questions in the data that we have collected from 2018 and 2019. The data collection experience was actually a part of a class of NYU across. So it was an undergraduate class where they were learning about data collection methods and development economics. And so it was a part of a class. So the data window was very short. But it's a great point that we could do some follow-up and really try to identify the mechanisms as to what's going forward. I view that as like future research, right? Really trying to nail down the mechanisms.
Thanks, Gisela. I think we need to get our other discussants in. Marcela?
Perfect. So now, please, Gisela Kaji, the comments on the Uchina FOB paper, please.
Great. I'm just going to share a slide. I hope this worked.
Yeah, you can see.
Yes. Okay, great. So I really enjoyed this paper. I'm sticking very close to the instructions for this. So what this paper does, right, is it explores the relationship between age at marriage and entrepreneurship activity in Nigeria. Two, like, just high-level things that I really liked. This is such an important topic. It's really great to read research about this. And I think the framing of relating this to the number of child brides in Nigeria was really impactful for me. You kind of brought that in a little bit later in the paper, but for me, that really kind of made it click as to, you know, the importance of the question and the importance of what we're doing. It's also a clever use of VHS data of, you know, really trying to understand different components of a woman's life, right? A comprehensive picture of her life. So the suggestions that I had, and these are kind of in line with some comments that I saw in the chat while the presentation was happening as well, right? The first is it possible, right, given the data, to look at a more comprehensive picture of a woman's economic activity, right? So you use a binary indicator for entrepreneurship and then also a binary indicator for intensity. But it would be really interesting to understand if they were engaged in wage work, and if there's any way to disentangle the differences in different types of entrepreneurship activity, right? We know that so much of what women are doing is entrepreneurship activity, but there's wide variation in that. So I'm not sure the level of detail that you're able to get with the Nigerian DHS in terms of that, but I do believe you should be able to understand wage work if they're engaged in wage work. So that could be very interesting. It also would be very interesting to look at this for not just unmarried women, right, but looking at married women as well, and understanding what the relationship looks like for there. It also would make the story a little bit richer if you could include other possible outcome variables, right? If they have decision-making ability, or employment type I just talked about, but decision-making ability would also help strengthen the mechanism story. And the second main suggestion is I would love to see more robustness regarding the mechanism of education, right? So how can we be more certain, right, that the pathway is that age of marriage is impacting education, which is then impacting entrepreneurship? It was not clear to me that the instrument you're using doesn't also impact education, right? So it wasn't clear to me that the direction really was just that the instrument is impacting marriage, right, which would then impact education and impact entrepreneurship. So it would be really interesting to try to disentangle the pathways there. I think from a policy point of view, right, from a policy point of view, are we talking about finding ways to adjust the age of marriage, or is it finding ways to adjust the age of education? And I know these are all intricately linked, but I think presenting more robustness regarding the exact mechanism and the exact pathways that you're interested in would be very helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think now we move to Eugenia Efobi commenting Jocelyn Finlay, and then we have the open discussion.
Thank you very much, Giselia, for the comments. I really appreciate it, and they will help to also improve our paper. So let me just move on straight to the paper I'm discussing. So the strength of the paper is actually is that it's questions. It challenges the quantity quality trade-off theory, and it also challenges the unitary model of household members actually sharing earned income among common household goods, which mostly are children. So it's actually very interesting in terms of trying to challenge this theory and its applicability in low income countries. Now, but Jocelyn actually finds a positive relationship between fertility and labor force participation, especially in, which is actually in contradiction to the quantity quality theory. But just a suggestion is that she uses outcome variable in terms of whether the woman is actually engaged in a work or not, right? But the issue there is we're not able to know if the measurement of labor force participation is actually a paid employment, or she's engaged in a self-employment, which I suspect might vary in terms of the relationship between fertility and such outcome variables. So going forward, I'm thinking if it will be, if she can actually consider estimating such outcome by disentangling that variable into paid work or into self-employment. Then finally, the assumption that other women that actually reside in the household help their fellow women to take care of their children. That assumption actually should come with an important caveat. Why I say so is because how about households that all women are actually working, or household whereby some women are actually engaged in some educational activities like going to school? So to just have a blanket assumption that if other women are within a household, they are likely to help others in raising their children might not be entirely might not be universally as applicable, I think, considering these dimensions that actually exist within households in low income countries. Overall, I enjoyed reading your paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uchina, for your comments. What's the closing time, just to program? I didn't see that in the
15
program.
minutes. We have 17 minutes to go.
7 minutes, perfect. Okay.
17.
Besides the other part, the meet the authors session, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So please feel free to interact.
Maybe can I respond to Uchina's really good comments? So I'll start with the last one, since about that you're right, that of making this assumption that just because there's another woman in the household that she's helping the working woman. So in the paper, I try to tease this out a little bit. So I create this variable of what I call the index woman, and she's sort of like the alpha woman of the household. And so she's either the head of household herself, or she's the wife of the head of household. But she's sort of like at the apex. And then other women are kind of under her. And so daughters are an obvious candidate for that. And then because polygamy and then identifying the first wife, that's another story, I think, polygamy. There is, so all the stuff from Boserup indicates that there is some sort of cooperation between the wives in polygamous households. But I think it's too complex to lump it into this paper. So I actually exclude them from the sample. So to try and focus on this paper of the child carer. And so I think Heath really found, and then another paper found, that it's really the daughters that are helping out, the older daughters. And so I think this concept is worth exploring more for me. But I also find evidence that leans more towards what you're saying, that it's not that the index woman is working and then there's this other woman in the household, the daughter or another relative, who's the designated child carer. It's more that because I have this availability variable, like where I label these other women, if they're working or in school, then they're not available. But I find that actually you're right, that in the household, it's either that all the women are working or in school, or they're not. And so it's more like this, there's this big jumble of like everybody's sort of helping each other. So I feel like that availability variable teases that out quite well. So yeah, I am continuing to pursue that line that you raised. And as for sort of the other types of, the type of work, self-employment or working for the family, and how she's paid, this is available in the DHS that I use for this study, but for me, that's another paper. I've been pursuing another paper on this about sort of the degree of empowerment of work. And it's actually shocking how the fraction of women who are not paid in cash, like basically paid for their work. And it's something like, I think of the women who work, and maybe only 50% of them receive cash earnings for their work. And the rest are paid as some sort of combination of cash and in-kind, or not at all. So there's a lot of women who respond that they are working and they're just not paid. And I find this is like, what? So I feel like that's another paper as well of really investigating what is work. So I just sort of wanted to show it like a brief overview of like the very basic correlation, that it's positive or null. And then, so why are we even using these theories from the sort of high income country literature? So that's I sort of felt like the basic variable was showing that point. So thank you so much. I feel like that your comments really brought out some of the main things that I was trying to show in the paper, and you highlight that I need to do it a little bit better. So thank you, Gina.
Gina, if you want to react to the Gisela comments, it was a bit in a rush, and then Marlene has also the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Gisela. So actually, all your comments they are actually aimed at improving this paper, and I really appreciate it. For instance, you mentioned if we could consider maybe other dimensions of work. Yes, we can actually, because the data has rich information, whether the woman is paid wages for her work, or if she's paid wage and in kind, or if she's not even paid at all. So we can actually consider these different outcome variables. Then in terms of robustness of our estimation regarding the effect of age at marriage and education as an important mechanism. Yes, we can conduct that, but our understanding is we didn't really pay much attention in trying to ascertain the robustness of the mechanism, since that is more like a supplementary estimation. But since you drew our attention to it, I think it would be interesting if we consider the robustness. Then the instrument we used, we did not think it in relation to age at marriage and education, although it can be correlated with education. But since that's not our outcome variable, we didn't really pay much attention to trying to ascertain if it does not indirectly affect education. So I'm thinking, I think statistically, right, we can get away with that, especially when it has to do with considering a different outcome variable that is not the main outcome variable of interest. So, but overall, I think your comments are well received, and they will help to improve our paper. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was a very interesting paper, and I think it's a very clever use of the DHS data, and there's a lot to learn. And yeah, I think in regards to the instrument, I have to look back at the paper specifically, right? But it'd be important in the first stage too to include all of the covariates that you eventually use, right? The key with the instruments is just getting the readers to believe the exclusion restriction, and so that was my I was confusion a little bit, but if like it really truly meets the exclusion restriction, right? Given that the instrument could also potentially impact education on its own, regardless of age of marriage. That's what I was thinking, right? Because I was thinking I like kind of step down the line if you're talking about policy, right? Is it really age of marriage that's important, or is it really education that's important?
Oh.
But
okay.
I think it's super interesting, and I also acknowledge that these are very, very difficult to entangle, right? It's this complicated dance that happens. But I think if there's a way to attempt to do that empirically, it would be really interesting.
Okay.
I also find that the DHS, it's really hard to work with identification with the DHS because it's a repeated cross-section, and no matter how you thrash it, it's still a repeated cross-section. So I find it kind of frustrating and to work with for these sort of identification type questions. You start messing around with cohort, and you've done it, like the cluster averages. So you start to do all these tricks, and at the end of the day, it's just like, damn it. It's still a repeated cross-section.
Sure.
I have one comment that I think cuts across all the papers, and I don't know that there is much you can do about it in terms of the data available to you, but self-employment and entrepreneurship are have different meanings in different lives. For people who can't qualify for wage jobs or who have limitations in their life that keeps them out of wage work, it is often a last resort, make my own job. But there's also self-employment among people at the other end of the scale who are very skilled and can use self-employment to supplement their income or to extend their working life. And I know in US data, they very seldom distinguish those groups, but those are very different patterns of self-employment in somebody's working life. That may not be as applicable in the context that you're analyzing, but I just thought I'd get your thoughts on that type of pattern.
Yeah, Marlene, I think you just like really expressed that very well. This idea, right, between being doing it out of necessity versus doing out of opportunity, right, is so important, and it's figuring out how to distinguish that is really challenging, right? It's really challenging, but it's important because it has different implications for what this means for people and how they're going to engage with it as well. I know in the Ghana context, right, I can speak about that. Most people are doing it out of necessity, right? We do ask questions about what is their preferred type of employment, and it's consistently wage salaried work. This is in the context that I'm talking about. It's most of the time very much a last resort necessity because there are no other options.
Yeah, I actually, just to your comment, Marlene, I feel like as researchers, we even see this for our enumerators. You know, the enumerators that we often hire are completely overqualified, really. They're often master's level students or graduates, and they've been, say, looking for these wage employment jobs, and being an enumerator is kind of like a side hustle that just became their job. And so I feel like that sort of maybe it also mixes up lack of opportunity even at the higher end. So yeah, it's almost like you have to be an entrepreneur at all levels just to survive, because there are so few jobs in these formal labor markets and that are waged.
And I think that's the point Uchenna made at the beginning of his paper, that some people might not think entrepreneurship is such a great thing, but with extensive unemployment, it's almost a requirement. And for women's paid employment and its relationship to fertility, that's the debate that we've had before, Jocelyn. When is employment a distress response, right, as opposed to a choice?
Yeah, I discussed that a lot in the paper when, you know, in assuming endogeneity, and that, you know, you choose how much you work, you choose how much, you know, you have kids, and they sort of respond to each other. It's like there is no choice. So yeah, I do have that. You're acknowledged in the paper, by the way, Marlene, as a long-time proponent and supporter of this topic.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Lena if she had a question or comment, and to make sure we were not crowding her out.
Thank you. No, I'm here for Gisela's presentation. I'm the co-author on here for moral support.
Thank you. Marcelo, I'll give you the last word.
Okay, thank you, Marlene. I think just one last question. You know, Uchenna mentioned in his paper that you don't have the control, the good variable for the intensity or for the level of the business, like the profit variable, and normally in the surveys we collect all over, except specific surveys, we use, you know, we ask directly the profit, and there is no negative profit, like no losses. So I mean, you kind of censor the distribution, and you. So when I see the data, I get that to make you got to have money to lose money as well. So there is a kind of that risk. So if you move to the next, if you are able to get this variable, at some point would be nice to have these, take into consideration these sensors. So I think we are pretty much on time now, 12:15 almost, and but fortunately we have the meet the authors room, and we should move directly to this link. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank all the participants, thank to USPP for the great, amazing organization. And I'm not gonna say happy holidays yet, because we're going to meet soon in the other room. Thank you.
Great
Thank you
session.
soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.